Welcome to the latest episode of the Claus Corner. Today I finished my conversation with actor, director, producer, writer, editor, and voice actor Stanley Livingston. In the last episode, we discussed his start in show business, acting movies with people such as Paul Newman, Joanne Woodward, David Niven, Doris Day, and many, many others. And we also discussed his role as Richard Chip Douglas on My Three Sons that made him a household name. Last time we were talking, we ended with the highlight of your career, I think, how the West was won. So let's start where we ended. First of all, I want to say
people.
Something. Oh no, I'm sorry. I just want to say.
Oh, I was going to say most people know me from My Three Sons, but yeah, how the West was one thing. It's a big deal for me.
Well, let me tell you why. And if my viewers don't remember, because I didn't remember, I'm going to go over a partial cast. You had Carol Baker, Lee J. Cobb, Henry Fonda, Carolyn Jones, Carl Malden, Gregory Peck, George Peppard, Robert Preston, Debbie Reynolds, James Stewart, Eli Wallach, John Wayne, Richard Widmark, Walter Brennan, Agnes Moorehead, Harry Morgan, Russ Tamblyn, Spencer Tracy, and Claude Akins. And that was a partial list. So I can't imagine, so I know I want to get into this because the movie was filmed by three directors, Henry Hathaway, John Ford, and George Marshall. Who was the director that directed your part?
Well, the bulk of the stuff that I was in was directed by Henry Hathaway.
Yeah.
He directed like the third part. The first part, I guess, was John Ford. In the middle, was George Marshall, I think.
Yeah, George Marshall. So who were the main actors that you acted with? I saw a couple scenes with you recently just to brush up on it. And I saw George Peppard definitely singing in the wagon with you.
Yeah, he was kind of a big deal. Well, I should probably preface all this so people understand why this movie was so special to me. You know, when I first was a kid and wanted to be in acting, on TV back then, there was all these Westerns, Hopalong Cassidy and Roy Rogers, just, a plethora of cowboy stars. And that really kind of tickled my fancy. And I remember I had a bunch of cowboy get-ups. In fact, my first set of headshots were done in cowboy wardrobe, which I've never been hired, but that was my idea of what should be done. And my mom humored me, so we had these pictures done by a photographer named John Reed. I still have them. And I'm not smiling in them because I don't have two front teeth. My teeth fell out, so I'll tell you how young I was. But yeah, and one of the earliest things I did, I got into show business to become a cowboy actor, to become a cowboy, on TV or in the movies or something. That's what I thought I was going to be doing. And early on, I thought I hit pay dirt. I actually got a commercial with Roy Rogers. Wow. I'm in it. It's me and Roy Rogers. And he was hawking a toy lariat. And so he's spinning it, and I'm next to him spinning mine. And then he backs away and throws it, and it goes over me. And then he ropes me in with this toy lariat. I remember shooting it and how excited I was to meet, Roy Rogers. And I had just assumed from there I was going to be doing all Western. Well, that didn't work out quite as planned anyway. Well, the first 2 hours of your show explained all the stuff I did instead of being a cowboy. But it was always in the back of my mind that I wanted to do a Western, even as getting older, although it was kind of, a pipe dream probably by that point. But fortunately, about I guess it was after I started My Three Sons, about 1962, and it was between seasons, my agent got a call, and the director, Henry Hathaway, wanted to see me. I guess his casting person put my picture on his desk, and they were looking for some kids for the movie. And I remember I had to go in and meet him. And yeah, he was just, the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. And, we kind of bonded and, talked about guns and horses and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, wow, this is great. And the only caveat was that was between 62 and 63. When I was doing My Three Sons, there's not a whole heck of a lot to do on a sound stage when you're not shooting and going to school. And about the only thing to do was eat donuts and drink coffee. Well, I ate quite a few donuts, and I had started to gain some weight. And his thing to me was, if you want this part, you got to lose 10 pounds in something like a month. And I had to come back to his office to show him that I lost it. So my parents enrolled me in this gym called Vic Tanny's on Vine Street. And I had a coach who, walked me through, all the things I had to do to get the flab off. And I kind of went on a starvation diet. Back in those days, you drank this crap. It was called Metrical,
Yeah.
in lieu of a meal. And I did it because I was, I wanted that part. Came back a month later and, I think I was 12 pounds thinner. I got the part.
I
And
can't imagine that happening now, though. If a director ever asked an actor that now, they're like, "Oh my God, you're body
oh
shaming
yeah,
this and that." It would be such a yeah.
especially a kid actor, that would have really been through the roof. Only thing worse would have been telling a woman you got to lose
I know.
weight.
Well, it's funny because I hear all these stories about Judy Garland and everything that she went through, and that's why
Yeah,
she being hooked on pill. I mean, her mother would give her a
yeah,
pill to wake up. She'd take a pill
yeah.
to go to sleep. Don't eat this. I mean, yeah, I hear all these stories about early Hollywood and how the directors and producers would say, "If you want the part, you better lose this." Yeah, it's completely different scene back then than it is
Yeah,
now.
well, back then, like I said, there was Metrocol. It was this drink
Yeah.
that was in a can. It was kind of like a milkshake, and you got sufficient calories and vitamins and all that in it. And then there were Metrocol cookies that you kind of ate too when you got a little bit hungry. And then you're on a lean food diet. I mean, a lot of people I know, they were on a diet, but they ate whatever they ate anyway and drank the Metrocol as the beverage, and they kept getting fatter because it was loaded with
Oh
the
man.
calories you would need for a day. But yeah, so I got hired, and I guess I was on that movie for about 3 months. We shot
Wow.
at MGM Studios, a lot of the interiors. We shot in, I'm trying to think where else we went to, Lone Pine, California.
Mm-hmm.
And we shot in Prescott, Arizona. We shot in Kingman, Arizona. So it was, quite a big deal, and consumed a good portion of my time. And they knew they had to get all my stuff done because it was in my contract. I, would be going back to shoot My Three Sons at a certain point, so everything had to be done. But they agreed to that, and so I got to work at all those places.
Well, the best thing
So
is that I'm sorry to interrupt you. But I want to say it's like you always wanted to be a Western star. You picked the biggest Western of the time to
Well,
be
that's
on.
what I was gonna say. If you had to pick a Western to be in, maybe besides Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, to be in, or I guess there's a couple others that I really like too. But
Yeah.
yeah, this was the one to be in. I mean, not only was it a Western, but it was the only Western and ever shot in Cinerama. They used the Cinerama filming process, which was having three cameras lashed together with two side cameras and a middle camera. That's how they do it. And it kind of saw this huge arc, huge swath of, it was the same thing almost as human vision. I think it's 168 degrees or something like that. And it was going to be projected on a screen that was also curved and emulated what you would see with human vision. So it was going to be something. And then, as you mentioned, it had everybody who was anybody
My
in
God.
Hollywood at the time starring in it. I mean, the real star of the movie was Debbie Reynolds.
Mhm.
The storyline followed her from the time she was like a 15, 16-year-old girl all the way till at the end. She's an old lady. She's my great aunt at the
Yeah.
end.
Well,
And
from
she
what I
has a lot
heard
of,
too, now what I was going to say was originally in the movie they were going to have her drown, and they changed the ending because they wanted her to live. And she and George Papard are the only one that I think are in 3 of the 5 sequences, or maybe even more sequences. So yeah, she had a bigger
uh,
part than what they.
she
That's just
was,
what I was reading.
I think she's the only one really in 3
Okay.
sequences.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think George Papard is. He's Carol Baker's son.
Yes.
Uh,
Which I
I
think is
mean,
funny because I
the
think
irony is, I think they were the same age in
3 years older.
actuality to them. Yeah, yeah,
He was,
wasn't much of a difference. And he hadn't done a lot of work at that point. I think he had done Breakfast at Tiffany's and maybe one other film when he got cast in this part. So it was I never really thought about it, but this must have been a big deal for him too, to be in a film like that, was that grand and huge in scope, and working with, legendary director like Henry Hathaway.
yeah.
So, yeah, so she's was kind of the focus of the movie, but the sequences that I'm in is in that last third of the film where George Papard is older, and he has a family. He's married to Carolyn Jones from the Addams Family and from
Morticia.
King Creole, yeah. And let's see who else was in there. Eli Wallach,
Yes.
was part of that third party, played Charlie Gant, the bad guy, and had some scenes with him. But yeah, it was just great. And also another character actor who was, I just had to meet him. I saw this movie in 1960 called A Pocket Full of Miracles with Glenn Ford. And it was just like one of my favorite movies. And I thought Mickey Shaughnessy stole the movie. And Peter Falk, he was just so funny as this lame brain bodyguard gangster. And I kind of hung out with him while we were shooting on the set. Again, an older guy humored me, and we played cards, and he was really, really a nice guy. But yeah, most of my scenes, were with George Papard, a lot with mainly Debbie Reynolds. But the horror of shooting how the West was one for me was the Santa Claus guy that hired me. Turned out to be Hitler incarnate on the set.
Oh no.
He was, and I didn't know this. I mean, everybody else did because they'd worked with him before, but he was a real rough, tough son of a bitch guy, given to profanity at everybody and screaming at everybody and shooting crew guys with blanks and all kinds of crazy stuff. And he didn't spare me either. He screamed at me and pretty much almost had me in tears a couple times because I'm used to working with Peter Tewksbury, who's like this nice, quiet director who draws things out of you through appealing to your emotions and stuff. And meanwhile, this guy gets things out of you with like the threat of death. So,
well, I guess working with William Frawley was a good thing. No, so I guess working with William Frawley was kind of a warm up with all the language that he used.
It was nothing like Henry Hathaway. I assure you, it was nothing. He's as mean as he might have seemed like. It wasn't like Henry. And the things that I saw going on, I was afraid that was going to happen to me. But yeah, he'd unload on you all the time. And like I said, a few times I felt like crying. And finally, one of the crew guys came up to me, and he could see I was kind of disturbed by it, and he says, "Look, kid, this guy treats everybody that way, not just you, so get used to it. He's a tough guy, but he doesn't mean anything by it." And I was, that kind of made it better, because then I did notice he was screaming at everybody, and the only person, well, he screamed at her, but she was the only one. She didn't have the temerity that everybody else had, and she would get right and scream right back with four-letter words with Debbie Reynolds. She'd back him up, put him back on his heels, and so we kind of liked that, when it would go down, and she'd get up and either defend me or one of the other kids, and give him what for. But one of the funniest things that happened to me was there was this one day where he was just being, I don't know whether he's picking on me or particularly in a bad mood himself. And I found out later, I think he had just either had or was about to have what do they call that? A colostomy bag implanted. Oh, yeah. And I think he was not in good health and irritable and all this other stuff that just kind of added to the Henry Hathaway-ness of him. So, yeah, he was kind of hard on me. And then I remember we cut, and I knew it was almost lunchtime. So I started to walk back to where my guardian was. And I figured I'd just, hang out with some of the other actors, or I used to hang out with the stunt guys. I like that too. And all of a sudden, Henry Hathaway's behind me. He goes, "Hey, kid. And I kind of stopped. And he goes, "I want to take you to lunch." And I remember I looked over at my mom, and I'm like, "I don't want to go, with this guy." And my mom goes, "You're gonna have to go." And so I went with him, and he had a driver, and we got into a limousine. And instead of eating with the rest of the cast that day, we drove back into Prescott, Arizona, and had lunch in the restaurant with just me and him, and just talking. And I was kind of more at ease because he was just being kind of like how he was when I met him, in the office, and just really, being a nice guy, and asking me all kinds of questions. And I think he knew I was on My Three Sons, but he was asking me a lot of questions about that in the show, because they already found out too, when that was the other kind of embarrassing thing. But we would go into these locations, and then all of a sudden, like 200 kids would show up, and people, the director was like, what are all these kids doing here? You know, who they're yelling at, for, George McCartney. Like, no, they're yelling for him. That guy's Chip on My Three Sons. 70 million people watching the show a week. And I don't think that quite, he hired me, got that. I'm sure he wasn't a TV watcher, but
Yeah.
the power of TV in those days. And every time we go somewhere and kids would find out I was there, it would be, a whole scene of hundreds of kids showing up wanting to meet me, and I had to sign autographs and all that stuff. It wasn't about how the Westers won. So anyway, we have lunch and walked out, and we start walking back towards the car, and he says, hey, he goes, there's a toy store over there. He says, you want to go over there and get something? I was like, well, he go, come on, let's go. And so we crossed the street, went into this toy store, and I'm looking around, and so he goes, I want to get you something. So I was thinking, well, that's good because I don't have any money on me. So I'm looking around, I'm trying to find something small or sensible, just something token like, so he could say he got me something like a baseball mitt or ball. He goes, well, what do you like? What are you into? And I was like, well, since we've been out here, I'm into rocks. I'm collecting rocks and geodes and all this stuff, arrowheads. And it just happened on the wall, kind of above where the cash register was this huge, like cardboard display case that must have like 200 sample rocks in it. It was like everything from fool's gold to, all the different kind of rocks and stones you would collect. And so he goes, kind of like that. And I'm like, yeah. He goes, get that down. And anyway, I think it was like $200 back in 1962. So
Wow.
he bought this enormous, and it was like folded clothes. It was like a book, like a book, like a book, but it had shelves in it. And these rocks were all attached in there, somehow glued in or something. And then we took it back. I remember I was excited and showed it to my mom, and I thought, well, I guess. She goes, how did it go? And I went, yeah, it went great. He was really nice, and I'm not as afraid of him anymore. And he
Do you
was
think
really
he heard
nice.
something about that? Do you think he heard that you were afraid of him and he did that to make it more comfortable for you, or just he happened to be in a good
No,
mood?
no, that he just. Well, let me finish the story. So
Okay.
basically, I assumed we had bonded, and it was going to be different. Anyway,
Oh.
about a half hour later, I get into makeup, come on the set, and it started, you little son of a bitch, Ken. I told you to do, I was like, I thought we were friends now. And
Oh,
I thought about yelling something at him back, kind of like Debbie Reynolds, and I wished I would have, because I think he would have respected that you
yeah.
stood up to him, even though what am I, 14 years old or something like that. I think it would have, but it might have backfired too, and I would have got fired. So I couldn't take the chance, but I was so disappointed that we didn't have this breakthrough, and he would have treated me different. But then I'm looking around, he didn't treat anybody differently. Like I said, it was the same the whole time. In fact, that's what I was going to say. He finally got sick, and there was about a week where he couldn't shoot. And I was thinking, oh, thank God, coming hopefully to get somebody nice, get somebody like Gene Reynolds or, all the guys that I worked
Yeah.
with that were, even Leo McCarey, who was kind of gruff too, would have been better. They get John Ford.
Oh.
So he's just another, it's another Henry Hathaway screaming at everybody. So, but at least I can say I was directed by Henry Hathaway and John Ford for about a week or 2 weeks or something. It was kind of interesting, but yeah, it
I
was.
can't remember which one, but I was reading trivia in this movie, and I know that Debbie Reynolds had a swear jar for one of it might have been John Ford, because he swore so much, and they every time he swore they had to
Yeah,
put money in there. I can't remember which one it was, but yeah, I know that I was reading about how she stood up to a lot of the directors in this movie.
yeah. Well, we were shooting one time. It was supposed to be right at the end of the movie. We actually shot part of it in Lone Pine, where you'd see the wagon. We were all in it. And we're singing Green Sleeves or whatever that song is. Come away with me.
Yeah, come away with me.
And then on the stage they had brought the wagon there. We had a big, I guess it was a blue screen in those days. Blue works with film, green's more for video. So they had a blue screen, and then they had a rear projection, and they would project from behind, and it was the plate that they had taken from when we shot at Lone Pine, and we're supposed to be riding along and singing, and something went wrong, and he got all mad, and I remember he pulled out his, he had one of the it was a gun, with blanks in it, shot like.
Oh my God.
I know that really made me feel good. I'm like, God, I hope I don't screw up my line. I'll get shot. But
Well,
yeah, it was a terrifying experience, but a really good lesson.
yeah.
That's the point. Is not everybody's even tempered and nice to work with and work in a certain way. There's directors that like that kind of tension on the set,
Mhm.
and I mean they really drive their crews crazy. But unless it's John Wayne, there's no difference showed at all. They're just tyrants on the set. It's like that Charlie Chaplin movie. What was it called? City Lights, where he brings that drunk home. And the
Mhm.
guy, you're my best friend. You're great. I love you. In the morning, wakes up, and the guy's like Hitler. He's crazy and mean and all that. So, yeah, that was my experience with Henry Hathaway. And well, he obviously survived a while long enough to do True Grit
Yeah, yeah.
with John Wayne. But yeah, I would do it in a heartbeat again. Being older and just because of my disposition now, I
Yeah.
wouldn't bat an eye at saying something back to him. I've done that with
Yeah.
people before who've talked in a certain way to me. It's like, hey, you don't talk to me that way. If you do want to talk to me that way, out the door. Let's go. We'll
Well, I
go
can see
settle
you're
it
a 14-year
outside.
old kid and you're just starting in the movies. So, I definitely understand your thought process
Yeah,
back
I'm a
then.
child actor. I
Yeah.
partially was inculcated with subservience to these
Yeah.
people, and that wasn't really in my demeanor anyway. But I, somehow did that. But that would be the opposite of probably who I am now. I don't like stuff like that, whether it was directed at me or if it was at somebody else on the set. I'd probably call the director on it. Go, look, it doesn't
Good.
help to do that. You're making everybody uptight. And if you want to get performances, that's not the way to get it.
Well,
But
speaking of performances, I want to talk about this because you mentioned earlier it was filmed in Cinerama. From what I was reading, I guess it
mhm.
was so expensive. They wanted to make sure that every actor got their lines correct the first time because they really cost so much to film. And it was so hard to act because it didn't look natural. What was it like acting in Cinerama for you?
Yeah, unnatural. Only, not in that you were doing with your performance. It's where you would have to look
Yeah.
because there's no such thing as a close up in Cinerama. Basically, you could be in one of the three panels and you wouldn't want the panel line going through your nose and your nose because that panel is kind of always moving up and down. So that wouldn't look good. It's not a good look. Um, and yeah, because it's curved, because the angle that they're shooting and because it's going to be shown on a curved screen. The odd part would be if you're shooting a regular TV show or movie with a regular camera, you know where to look. You're looking you look slightly off axis at the person. You'll never look in the camera. But in Cinerama, if the person say was here, you might be looking this much around. So, and you're not even really looking at the person, and you're doing your line. You can see the person, but it's like you're looking maybe 10 feet to the left of them and doing your line to that spot. They would tell you because they would look through the lens. They had a thing that they could emulate what was being seen, and they
Yeah.
would tell you, "Oh, keep turning, keep turning, keep turning." Okay, right there. Say your line. What to pick a spot there, and when you do that line, make sure you turn your head around and say it to that spot, even though the person was like right here. So that part was a little bit freaky. Well, I did another Cinerama film later that I produced, that in the picture thing. I don't know whether you saw that, but yeah, every time we turned on the camera, and we're like, everybody better know their lines, including me, because I had a lot of them, and I'm the guy that had the lines that are always like, a third of a page. So I'm going, I want to miss this up. Every time we pulled the trigger on the camera, it was $500
My God. I can't imagine
because
why that
you're
didn't
you're
last.
not running, you're shooting three times the film you need because there's three cameras that are in sync that are locked together, and strips of 35 millimeter film are going through them simultaneously. So if you blow it, you just blew through strips of film, and
Yeah.
it's worthless. You got to throw it away. In fact,
And of course, they
the
have to
guy
pick
that
a
who
two.
was
I was going to say, of course, they have to pick a 3-hour movie epic to use Cinerama on.
Yeah, well, it was the natural progression. I mean, a lot of people don't understand what Cinerama was. Cinerama actually saved the movie industry. in its inception in the early 50s, 1952, 53, nobody heard of it. Like when you went to the movies, it was like your old TV set. It was like a square box and square format, 3x4, the ratio. And there wasn't such thing as widescreen. Everything up to Cinerama was shot that way. It was in that 3x4 format. And these scientists and guys that were engineers came up with this idea of hooking three cameras together that would give this sweeping view. And but they weren't really filmmakers, but they came up with this idea and they called it Cinerama, and they didn't know what to shoot. So what they shot it was like a documentary, and their idea was to go to all these exotic locations, which now wouldn't mean anything, because of the age of aircraft and jet travel that was just hadn't even come into being. I mean, you basically had to be rich to fly in the 50s. Only the wealthy flew. But so because what they were shooting with, okay, so part of it was called This is Cinerama. They would go to the pyramids in Egypt and shoot the pyramids and the Sphinx. Then they would go to Russia and shoot, part of the downtown area where they have what's it called, the Kremlin, and you can see it in Cinerama. And then they put it on a roller coaster, and and so you got this view. But it was interesting because in Cinerama, because of that curved screen, unlike looking at a flat screen, you're just looking at everything flat. But in a Cinerama screen, if the camera's moving, it's like being in a car. Like what you're looking at on the center panel and part of the side panels is just sort of there. But if you're moving, the sides are going whooshing by like they would in a car, and it's really dramatic. So they did this documentary. They, had to construct Cinerama theaters. There were about 350 of them built in the United States, and people took to it. It was like a special event. This was a thing where people didn't just go to the theater in their, cutoffs and wife beater. They basically put on suits and tuxedos. It was that kind of event, and you would see people going to these theaters like this is, they're going to see the opera or something. And, they were interesting because people got to see places on Earth they would never, ever get to go to in those days. And they did about 5 or 6 movies, but they were all travelogues, and it was kind of wearing a little bit thin. Somebody got the idea, well, why don't we do a movie in this? Like, actually tell a story. And I think the first movie that was done was The Wonderful World of Brothers Grimm. And it was that Grimm's Fairy Tales. It starred Lawrence Harvey as one of the Grimm brothers. And so it again was met with a huge, resounding reception in the theater. And like I said, it was a highly anticipated and well-attended event. And then they came up with How the West Was Won to be the follow-up to that. And I thought the Brothers Grimm was good too, because they actually moved the camera a lot. The problem with the earlier ones, well, they were documentaries, so it's only because people hadn't been to those places that it was bearable to watch it. But I remember I think it was in Russia, they show an opera, and it was shown in Cinerama, so it basically was static. They weren't even moving the camera. That's why I said, you could have shot this with the security camera at the back of the theater, and it would have been the same thing. It's just that this is huge and wide. When they finally figured out that if they moved the camera through space, like I said, they put it on a roller coaster, and now you had something. But it wasn't, again, it was just a documentary. So it was used really well in How the West Was Won. The camera moved, and it did all kinds of things besides just document what we were shooting in the storyline. And How the West Was Won, the storyline was great. The guy that wrote it, he won an Academy Award for the screenplay. And so it was a big deal. The problem was it was so darn expensive to shoot, and it was very laborious to do. The camera had to go into a blimp because it was like starting up an airplane engine when all 3 cameras. And if you're trying to shoot sync sound, it was almost impossible to do it without this blimp. And a blimp is kind of a soundproof booth. You put the camera in and shut it. And it literally was about the size of a phone booth. That's how big this thing was. Wow. I think it was made of lead, so it was extremely heavy. So after How the West Was Won, they started to rethink it. And of course, there's always these technical awards that come out, for the Academy Awards. And somebody invented these other lenses that allowed you to shoot in the same aspect ratio, super wide as Cinerama, but they invented this thing called an anamorphic lens, which could shoot all that wide stuff and squeeze it onto a single piece. Well, they decided to up the film instead of 35 millimeter film to 70 millimeter film by making it twice as wide. But you were able to do that with a single camera and a single piece of film. And they, I guess, came up with editing gear that could edit 70 millimeter. And then when you bring it to the theater, you didn't need three projectors, which also required three projectionists every time you ran it. Yeah. And then another guy there, because it was a real fire hazard. I think they had to have a fireman like right there in the booth, and somebody else to hand off or do things, because the projectionists were constantly tweaking each projector, because the panels would move. You'd see one panel kind of go up, and he would turn a knob and bring it back down. Otherwise, like I said, your eye could be up here and your face down there. So yeah, it was really expensive, laborious process. But what it did, at a time where moviegoers were kind of replacing going to the movie with this little thing called TV that came along, and nobody was going to the movies anymore. Well, this put a lot of butts back in seats in the movie theater. And they figured, hey, this is great, but we got to figure out another way to do it. And that's when I think it was called VistaVision ultra wide anamorphic process, 70 millimeter process came. And ever since then, everything's been in widescreen.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about that because you mentioned how expensive Cinerama is. Also, I cannot imagine making a movie with all of that star power now, because of the salaries they were getting probably back then. They're the biggest. I mean, they weren't all at the top of their game back then, but they were still big stars for the most part. I can't imagine how expensive that movie would have been, paying the stars, paying for Cinerama, and just filming in general. That must have been astronomical.
1963, but I think people waived their big salaries back then, but nobody was making that kind of money back then.
Oh, no, I know that.
John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart. The whole movie, I think, was under $6 million. I mean, that probably wouldn't have covered, the coffee and donuts on a movie today. Like on a Tom Cruise film,
that's just the food truck.
Budget. Or maybe his motorhome or something. Yeah, it's quite a big difference where salaries have gone and the cost of things, which is ironic because we now have digital filmmaking, which cut all of that expense out and the laboratory process out, and the idea that you had to make, copies, work prints, dailies, all these things you don't have to do anymore. So it just freed up money that all the producers grabbed for themselves and, give to Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise to be in the movie, and then everybody else works for scale.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, I did hear something about the way they were filming. John Ford always loved to be right next to the camera so you can look and see how it's being filmed. And he was, because of Cinerama, he was always on film. So somebody came up with the idea of building something that he was a little bit higher up. So
we had a thing too, because that is a problem, because when you're doing your lines off screen, and somebody's talking to you, but you don't see you see the guy that's on camera, but you're still here feeding him your off-screen line. To get where you would normally get, you'd be right next to the camera doing that normally, but in a Cinerama camera, where you think you would be, you can't be there. They actually had this stick that would come out on the side of the camera that they would attach, so you didn't move further than that. They had to do that a lot, like you're saying with John Ford or the directors, because they like to be right next to it or move their hands. And you see hands going like this, and like if this is the film, like Holly West, is all of a sudden you'd see this. It's like, wait a minute, it's John Ford's hand coming into frame. They forgot about it. And it's very disconcerting. You just have to keep remembering, don't do that, or don't step forward, or you could see a nose kind of. It's like watching, what is it? I watch the CBS News. There's somebody asleep there sometimes. They do this thing and you'll only see part of the frame. Like you'll be watching and you see the newscasters like right here, like his ear come in, but that's it. And I know what they're doing. There's a button that you push, like in the booth, for the camera so that it jumps way in and you can focus the camera and then you push it and jump back out. But somebody's pushing it and focusing and never pushing it out. So occasionally you'll see like a head, like a quarter of a head here and like an eye. And that's like what you watch for about 10 minutes.
They're like, I'll be right back. I have to use the bathroom. And then they come back.
Right. Said it. Oh my God, I forgot to jump the camera back out. It's still in focus mode. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there, but they do it a lot. You know.
Well, I'm glad you finally had a chance to realize your dream as a Western star, at least for one movie.
Yeah. Well, I would have almost had another. It really wouldn't have been Western, but I could have been satisfied with that too. I think I told you during the Skippy thing, I was up for Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah,
that would have been, I was totally into that when I was a kid. I think we built a raft. We lived in Hollywood. I lived right in the middle of Hollywood at Wilcox and Lexington, which not the greatest area in the well, actually it's come back now, but there was a period where it wasn't. But my day it was kind of a lower middle class area. And we got all this wood from a construction site and actually built a raft. And I had that little building on it so you could go in and pretend that. And we had it like in the parking lot of our apartment. And we built this thing. We go, wait a minute, where are we going to take it to put it in water? There's no water around here. So yeah, I think the landlord went ape shit and finally had the thing picked up and towed away, or the city came and got it. But yeah, I was always doing weird little things like that when I was a kid.
Well, I got to tell you something funny similar to that, because I was about 77. I was 9, 10 years old, and my brothers were about the same age. So we were watching Jaws, Close Encounters. So we were original kids. When Jaws came out, my brother wrote a book called Shark, and then we had a pond where we would film it. What we did was we took a big refrigerator box, made it into a cage, put my brother in it, and put it in the water. He almost drowned.
Oh God! Yeah.
And then when the Close Encounters came out, I wrote the classic called UFO. We built this big UFO, so I used to do the same thing, and we used to put on plays for the kids. They charge them a dime, and they'd have to watch us act it out. But yeah, my brother almost drowned as he was trying to be Hooper, catching the shark.
Yeah, that's what we did. We had like an 8mm camera or something, and we were all just making. Of course, there was no sound, but we were having fun making. Yeah, when I was, I guess 16, we made another app. Yeah, I was in high school then, but I still the same person. I want to make a raft, so I had about 8 buddies, and we were trying to figure out how to do it. And then this one guy, we talked to, hey, doesn't your dad have all those beer kegs at the back of his shop? And he's like, yeah, let's go over and talk to him. So he says, yeah, if you guys want to take these, get them out of here. So he goes, what are you doing with it? We want to make a raft. He says, well, I could weld some steel, weld them all together, put like a square thing over the top of 6 of them, and then you could attach the wood there. So we did that. We rented a U-Haul trailer, took it to this river that dumped into Hanson Dam. We went down. Well, dumb us, we made a square raft instead of a longer one. So it wasn't buoyant at all. It's like if you're on one side, this thing. So we all got on it. We lowered it down a cliff practically by a rope to get it into the water. And I guess it was about 6 of us got on it. And it was obvious, so just before we were going to cut the rope and go out and go down wherever it went, well, actually we did cut it, and it was like, and everybody jumped except my younger brother was on it, and then he got out into the rapids. But we had to follow him down from up above on this cliff, and sometimes he was in back of it just hanging on to the pipes, and then he'd get back on it. But it was, then we got it went into this lake, and just where we got there, a ranger came down and said, what is that? You can't have that there. That's drinking water. What are you kids doing?
Oh, man.
So he goes, you get that thing out of there. So it came over to shore, so we got Gene off of it, and we were, let's get the heck out of here. So we just left it there, made a run for it back to the car. And anyway, that was a whole day wasted. Nobody rode on the raft but my brother Gene.
That's funny. Well, you and I, besides doing that as kids, we have something else in common: our love of horror movies. And I wanted to talk about that because I want you. I wish I met some of the people, a lot of people you met, but 2 of the people I want to talk about is your experiences with Jack Pierce and Peter Lorre.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, yeah, Jack Pierce. I met. We were doing My 3 Sons. And we did a Chevrolet commercial. In fact, we had to shoot it. I think it was at the Samuel Golden Studios, and I didn't know he was going to be there. And in the morning when I got there and came to get made up, I was like, because as soon as I saw him, I knew who it was because I read Famous Monster magazine. And
Yes.
yeah, so I remember during the lunch hour, I went home, so I brought it back so he could sign it. And we were talking about the Frankenstein makeup and all that. He said, well, Cora, I could probably make you up like that. I was like, really? And so I never took him up on the offer, but yeah, he was a really nice guy, and was more because of my interest in those old horror films. These are the classic horror films like Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy. That when probably wouldn't scare anybody now, but in the 1950s and in the 30s when they were made, terrified people. And if you saw them in the movie theater with everybody screaming at once, it would be a heck of an experience. I knew them from TV, and my parents wouldn't let us watch them after a certain hour because they were afraid we'd get nightmares, but we always did anyway. Or they'd go up to something, go, hey, let's turn on, and the Mummy's on. And then we get paralyzed and frozen to the couch. When that mummy, that eye would open.
Oh yeah.
You're like, oh my God, that's scary. But yeah, I also followed that. You probably had heard of that magazine, Famous Monsters.
I have.
Filmed them. I had every issue, almost every issue. And in fact, it was funny because when I was doing How the West Is Won, I took all my lunch money because we got like a per diem, and I saved it up, and I had my magazines with me. And I didn't have, I think, the first 5, and I think I put $13.25 in cash in an envelope with this thing and mailed it off, so that I thought, well, when I get home, I'll have every single one of these monster magazines. And I never got them. In fact, it was funny. Years later, I went to Forey Ackerman's house, and first thing I said to him is, I said, you owe me $13.25. He's like, what? I was like, yeah, you owe me $13.25. In 1963, when I was doing How the West Is Won, I put my lunch money, cash, in an envelope for the first 5 issues of Famous Monster, and I never got them. Somebody took the cash, and I never got the magazine. So.
You were literally a starving actor.
Literally a starving actor back then. I would have rather had Famous Monster magazines than my lunch.
Well, what's funny? I didn't realize.
There was a restaurant actually right by where we shot at Desilu. It was called Oblat's. That was one of the places we would eat instead of going. Well, usually we ate at Nicodell's, but occasionally we would go there. But they had a magazine counter there. That was one of the magazines they carried, and yeah, I started collecting them, and that and Batman and Green Hornet and Superman, and those were probably not the earliest, but I can't imagine like even like 1959, 1960 issues must be worth something.
Do you still have all most of them?
Yeah, when I was like 13 or 15, my mom threw all that away. She threw all my comic books away. She threw my baseball cards away. Threw my marbles. I had a great marble collection that I won by playing marbles. Yeah, she tossed everything one day when I was at work.
I think you and I have the same parents because the same thing happened to me. All these toys I see that are worth, hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Like, oh my God. And my mother just said, that's garbage. Let me throw that. I mean, who would have thought back then that how much money they'd be worth now?
Oh yeah. I got a buddy. In fact, he's a psychiatrist. Definitely has a problem. I told him, but I went to his place a couple times, and his whole apartment, I think a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment, literally floor to ceiling in every room are shelves that are literally covered with that kind of stuff, memorabilia, all the way up to Star Wars, like every Star Wars creature. And I think he told me he was offered over $1 million for that collection.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep. So when he finally retires, I'll have it made. But I said, you'll never retire because you can never part with this. That's part of it. That's what you don't understand. You don't want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would never be able to. I don't have that kind of collection, but if I did, I would be the same way. It's like, I just can't do it.
I can't do it. Yeah. I'd want to pass it on to your kid is like, I don't want this junk. Yeah. One man's gold is another man's junk.
Oh yeah, and to me that's gold because I just like you. I love all the old horror movies. I love the newer stuff. I mean, I'm a huge fan of horror in general. But I want to
Yeah,
get back
me
to
too.
Jack Pierce for a minute because we were mentioning Frankenstein, and I did not realize because I've had Victoria Price on the show. I'm going to have Sarah Karloff on the show. When I was doing my
Mhm.
research for Sarah, I didn't realize the scene where they're picking the flowers and he throws the girl in the. I did not realize that was such a big controversy back then, and they
Yeah,
cut that out of the movie for the longest time, and then
yeah,
afterwards they put it back in, and because and Boris
yeah.
Karloff
Because
felt so bad about that.
the Hayes Commission, made them cut it out. They didn't want to see any children injured or anything like that on
Yeah,
film. So I guess they thought it would be horrible, and then later purists want to see it back in and
yeah.
put it back in. So yeah, those movies are great. Well, actually, I had another connection to that. This is years later, probably trying to think. I guess that would have been about maybe 18 or 20. I can't remember. But they were shooting another TV series next to where we shot My Three Sons, and now we were at CBS Cinema Center in the Valley. But my boss created another show called Family Affair,
Mm-hmm.
and they hired a director on that who by that point I was really interested in trying to make film and picking everybody's brain. How do you do this? How do you do that? Or why do you set it up this way? And the cameras, lenses, film stocks, and laboratory procedure, all this stuff I thought I was going to need to know to be a producer. And so the guy was named Charlie Barton, and I'd go to lunch with him, and he's just this really the sweetest guy, man. Just really full of information, and but he directed probably one of my favorite Frankenstein movies, or a movie with Frankenstein in it, which was Abbott and Costello Meet
Ah,
Frankenstein.
yeah.
Yeah, so that when
Wow.
I was a kid, that was probably my favorite movie. I just love that, man. Just like the idea that you can have scary stuff combined with comedy,
Mm-hmm.
and it was done so well. And then the dialogue is great. It's the Abbott and Costello kind of vaudeville bits, but the way they did it and created the scenes really took advantage of that. And it was, I think, the most successful film that year. It was the highest grossing film, and to this day is really, well known. Another thing that Charlie directed, which I didn't know that at that time, but that's, I think, besides The Honeymooners, was probably one of the funniest shows ever. It's classic. If you see it later, it's one of those kind of shows where you can watch the episodes over and over because it's just so darn funny. Is Amos and Andy?
Yes, I
Charlie
love
directed
that show.
all the well,
Kingfish.
Charlie Barton, yeah, Kingfish. I love Kingfish. Yeah, well, Charlie Barton directed all the episodes of that. So
That's
he
why
was
that name sounds familiar because my father has. I bought him. He always talked about that show, talked about that show. So I found it online. I got the VHS tapes for him years ago, and I finally got it on DVD. And every time I go to Cape Cod to visit him, we'll put on an episode. That show is the best. I agree with you. It's just so funny, and
It's so funny,
yeah,
and like I said, it's situational, but the situations are so funny, and then the characters, like you say, Kingfish. He was kind of like the Fonz. It was the
yes,
Amos and Andy show, but this guy came into it, and he's kind of like a character actor on it, but he finally became the whole thing.
oh yeah, he's always a con man, always trying to get one over on Andy.
Yeah,
Amos,
trying to bamboozle him, as you
yeah.
would say. Yeah, those
Yeah,
those
no.
were great.
When you say yes, when you said the name, I could not remember where I knew that name. But as soon as you said that, I love that show.
Well,
Another,
I watched them a zillion times too, and never noticed it till later. So we never got to talk about that. In fact, I started collecting Amos and Andy's because for a while you couldn't find them, and they sort of came out on videotape,
yeah,
and I got a lot of them. And then it turned out there was a guy I was getting them from, and then my neighbor, which was Sherman Hemsley from the Jeffersons, he
mm-hmm.
had some. So I gave him the ones that he didn't have, and conversely, he gave me the ones I didn't have. And then we found out we're both getting them from the same guy. So that was really kind of fun. But he was getting, I also had got some from another friend of mine who had them on beta.
Wow.
So yeah, I had to take them to this guy and get them to switch over. I had VHS, but I had almost all of them.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I was probably getting them from the same guy because I can't remember how many years ago it was, but I just, I said, I found the VHS tapes. I said, oh my God, you're going to love this. And he goes, really? They have it? And it was the same thing. I couldn't find it anywhere else, but I went on some online and I found it on VHS.
Yeah, I wonder if it was Stuart Showstack. Yeah,
Yeah, maybe.
a thing called Showcase Video, who was
Wait.
selling all these, old, shows like Jack Benny and
Yeah.
uh, Burns and Allen, and
Yeah.
again, Amos and Andy.
Yeah. I know. I'm not old enough to like for that, but I love all those shows. I watched them in online or on video, DVDs, and the shows are still great. I mean, I don't
Oh
care.
yeah,
The comedy
if
is
it's good,
timeless.
it is. I mean, you look at The Honeymooners. I don't care how many times you see it. It's funny. I mean, you actually a side splitting, roll on the floor, laugh. The
Yeah.
characters are so good and they're so ridiculous and appropriate for that era. I think. I don't know.
Well, I'm sure another thing, they cannot make any fat jokes anymore about Ralph Cramden. That's one thing they would have to cut out, all the jokes that Alice was making about him. But yeah, it's just, I mean, as you said, just like I Love Lucy, I know all the jokes that are coming. I laugh just as hard. An example
Yeah.
was I watched The Honeymooners, the one where Ed, he was trying to do the trivia for music, and the warm up he was playing Swanee River, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
finally at the end he goes, who wrote Swanee River? Ed Norton.
And Norton, right? Yeah, that was great. I like the one with the mother-in-law who we always was bickering with.
Yes.
And somebody had given Ralph 2 tickets to the hottest ticket in town to this mystery that everybody was talking about on Broadway, and they were actually going to get to see it. And the mother-in-law comes over, and before she gets there, he's telling out, I don't want her over here. He goes, all she does is pick on me, and she doesn't like anything, complains. So as soon as she comes in, it's sort of like, Ralph, you look like you're gaining weight. And he doesn't say anything, he just looks away. She goes, well, Alice, are you getting any? And she goes, what is it? I'm like, are you getting any of the food? And he's like ready to go. And then so he says, well, we got something going. We got these tickets to the hottest show in town, and I'm taking Alice, so I'm not the schmo you think I am. She goes, oh, that little thing. Everybody knows the butler did it. And so she spoils the whole show like that. Just the way she says, oh, that little thing. Everybody knows the butler did it.
That's hilarious.
He just stands up and he's like, out, get out, get out.
Well, I'm sure I mean, about that show that he hated to rehearse. He always wanted to be fresh. And the one with Audrey Meadows always had to make sure he was on his line and make sure he remembered his lines. So there was, I mean, it only lasted, 2 seasons? It's amazing. The show is a classic.
Oh, it's only 39 episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I think there's only one season. I mean, they did do other ones kind of integrated into the Jackie Gleason show where they continued the characters, but those weren't, I don't even think they were written by the same people. In fact, some of the people that wrote the Jackie Gleason show, I believe, were some of the same people that wrote the Amos and Andy show. So these people really knew situational comedy, and they were the same guys who go on to do the Lucy show.
Yeah.
And some of them, even on the My Two Sons, one of our main writers in the early days was Neil Simon's brother, Danny Simon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of amazing writers in those days. I mean, the difference, that's one of the things about writing now or writing for TV. It just all seems the same. Where I think the newer writers, unlike the older writers, actually the older writers did something with their lives sometimes before they were writers. They were in another line of business, or were stevedores, or in the military, or were executives on Broadway, and somehow came to the craft of screenwriting, and they brought that with them.
Yeah.
Where the people of our age, they grew up reading screenplay books and having no life experience, and are now writing screenplays and trying to pilfer what they can, off of celluloid as their experiences. And where have I seen this before?
Yeah. No, and everything unfortunately is so formulaic. Everything's by the book. Nothing's. I mean, back then it seemed like there was a lot more originality. They weren't afraid to try something different. That's why, for me personally, one of my favorite creators. I mean, I wouldn't even consider him a writer because a lot of it's improv. Is Larry David. I love Curb Your
Oh yeah,
Enthusiasm, and
yeah.
I love how he does that show. And I know that he said he writes a detailed outline, and then everything's improv in between. I mean, even Seinfeld. It's just that he tried something new and he wasn't afraid. And when they said, no, we don't want this, they're like, well, I'm walking out of here. And I don't know why they don't remember things like that, because if they didn't give Seinfeld a chance, because that bombed for the longest time, it was on Tuesday against Home Improvement. And then they put it on Thursday after Cheers. And that's when it started doing well. But I mean, now if the show doesn't do well within 6 weeks, like, all right, it's not going to be on for next season. They don't even give anything a chance anymore. It's sad.
Yeah, yeah. Well, everything has, something that inspired it. I mean, when I even think of Seinfeld, which was a show purportedly about nothing, which it was, just like the most trivial things, and you could turn that into a show, and it would be craziness. But who else did that way before? Ozzie and Harriet.
Oh,
Ozzie and
yes.
Harriet was really about nothing, absolutely nothing. Ozzie didn't even have a job. They never alluded to it, so I don't know what he did. But if you watch most of the shows, there's an episode. In fact, I did this. Barry and I, we went to the what's it called, the Hammer Theater in Westwood. I guess it was a couple months ago, and they had the 75th anniversary celebration of Ozzie and Harriet. And so we went and told some stories about working, because both of us had spent about 3 years. Barry was on it for about 5 before he came over to My Three Sons. And Tracy Nelson and Sam Nelson were there, and they ran a couple episodes, and then they ran a whole bunch of clips from the musical things that Rick did. But they showed an episode, and the episode they chose to run, and it's like I said, you talk about Seinfeld. It was about Ozzie being at home late at night, and he gets like a pang for ice cream. And he goes down and he loves Tutti Frutti ice cream. And it turns out there's only like one spoonful left. And the whole episode is about him putting his clothes back on, going out at about 10 o'clock at night, trying to find a drugstore, which is where he used to buy ice cream in those days, probably before Baskin Robbins or something. And, him spending an entire half hour looking for Tutti Frutti ice cream, finally finds it at the end. Some guy who just happens to have like 5-gallon drum in the back, but that's as Seinfeld as it can get.
Wow, you know what? I completely forgot about that. And I know it's 10 o'clock. You have to leave, unfortunately. And you know what? I definitely want to have you back at least one more time. We didn't even get to.
Yeah,
we'll have like a Rich and Stanley series, because there's so many things I want to get to. I want to talk about Peter Lorre still. I want to talk about Devlin, Scooby-Doo. I want to talk about Aftermath, Private Parts, your time in Laurel Canyon. There's so many things. So I got to have you back.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, no, we'll definitely do something. Yeah. In fact, that's good, because I'm redoing my website right now. In fact, that's what I've been doing for about 12 hours a day for the last 2 weeks. I thought editing was bad. I haven't done a website in years, and this one's really intense. It's probably about 60, 70 pages that are in there. So it covers my whole career. I decided I'm just going to do it this way and have everything in there. Most of the photographs from, stuff that I did, and little stories and whatever. So I have a page where I'm doing, I do a lot of podcasts and radio stuff. So I if you have something and you want me to put it up and link it back, I don't know if you have any graphic art or whatever, but I'll turn that into a link.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I didn't even know, because about 5 years ago, I don't think I looked at my website in 5 years. And the only reason I looked at it was, it's funny, I used to actually sell, the photographs, the headshots off there. Just, wasn't a big deal. It was like 12 photos, or you could pick one and buy it. And so I was getting a steady stream of people buying. And 5 years ago, it just stopped. And I thought, well, I guess the economy even got My Three Sons fans. But I didn't know it. Apparently, I was on an old website server, I think called a Trellex server, and apparently it couldn't accommodate the SSL certificate anymore. So now when you go to my website, well, as of 5 years ago, up in, where you see the little box with your URL in it, well, right next to it is a padlock that's supposed to be locked, and it's unlocked. So if you hovered over it, it says, whatever you do, don't go on this website, don't go here, don't give any information, don't buy anything, don't give any credit. And I had no idea. So I finally found out what happened to my website. So and I haven't refreshed it in 10 years. I'm gonna just completely tear it down, redo it. So I'm almost done with the rebuild. And I'll pull that one down, put this one up, and it'll be secure again. But I forgot how time consuming and intensive building these things can be. It reminds me when I used to edit, I'd start at 10 in the morning, break for lunch and dinner, and then edit till 3, 4 in the morning, get back up, and by 10 o'clock be back there again for days, days, days. Yeah, it's just, I'm like, wow, this is a crappy job. I wouldn't want to do this for a living. Yeah. Fortunately, I only have about 2 or 3 websites I got to get done. But yeah, anyway, when I was talking to the guy who does the hosting, he says, I don't know whether you know this. And I says, you had over 1 million hits at your website. I was like, really? He goes, I don't know how you got them because you have no SEO on here at all. He said, it's amazing. But people are coming. He says, you're getting he said, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 people a week come to your website.
Well, just wait until everybody can access that. You're going to have 10 million, 15 million hits.
Yeah.
And hopefully they'll be watching the Claw's Corner.
Yeah. So, people like watching, the videos and the audio. Well, last time I did it, there wasn't, any podcast. There wasn't any Zoom. It was all, radio. I was linking people back to radio stations so they could listen to it. But, in the last, probably 8-9 years with the advent of, iPhones and people putting stuff online, it's really kind of amazing to do this, and it's like a whole show. It's almost like going to the studio. In fact, I remember the days even in the radio show, you could have done this if we would have had the technology, but instead I had to get in my car at like 5 in the morning and drive down to K Earth and sit there live in the studio trying to keep my eyes open talking to Gary Bryan or some host or something. Yeah, they always wanted you in the station. But yeah, this works great.
I am a huge fan of Zoom. As I mentioned before, I used to do at a radio station, but because of COVID, it's a community radio station. So they said, well, we're not going to allow people in the studio, guests. So I started using Zoom, and I've had so much fun, and I've gotten great guests like you, as mentioned, Victoria Price, Ann Sterling, Adrienne Barbeau, Dee Wall. I mean, so many great people that just want to come on and talk on Zoom. So yeah, I love it. I mean, that's the one thing that was good that came out of the pandemic for me, was that Zoom became so popular and I'm able to access it and use it to my the best of my ability. But we definitely have to have you back. As I said,
it's a great thing. The best thing about Zoom is, hey, I don't have any pants on. Who'd know? I'm just kidding. You only have to be sort of made up from year to year.
I was gonna say, if the doorbell rings, please don't answer it until I stop.
Yeah, or please don't stand up. Yeah.
All right, Stanley, I know you have to go. Thank you very much for part 3.
Let's connect up in a couple of weeks, and we'll work our way through the rest of it. You're a good host, so.
Oh, thank you very much, and you're a great guest. So it's a perfect combination. I'm enjoying this.
All right, well, we'll be like Abbott Costello.
All right, well, have a great night. I will talk to you soon. And that wraps up today's episode of The Claw's Corner. A huge thanks goes out to actor, director, producer, writer, editor, and voice actor Stanley Livingston for taking time out of his busy schedule to be on the show once again, and he will be back. I promise you that. A big thanks also goes to John Bristol of Elmwood Productions for always doing a superb job editing this program each and every week. And lastly, but definitely not least, I need to thank you, the viewer, for always tuning in. Enjoy your day, everyone.
Talk to you later.
Now available in one collection. Confessions of a Frenetic Mind. 5 tales of blood-curdling terror. Available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
All of a sudden I hear, brim, brim.
What's a diaphragm again?
Ha! We caught one.
They're supposed to be weird.
Oh, yeah, no. If you say so.
I've always wanted to be in a movie.
Waiting around for autumn, waiting around for autumn, I was wild.